Wow, I'm really, really excited to welcome Andrew Soria uh, to the channel this evening. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, how's it going, Sandy?
So all the way from LA, which seems a million miles away, even though it really is so many miles away. But tonight here in Bournemouth, it's pouring with rain. It's a storm outside. So I'm going to say, excuse me if you can hear loads of, gale force winds and so on. But you're in downtown, and what's
Yeah,
it like
so
there?
same here. You might hear some noises, lots of ambulance. That's a pretty standard sound, but it's the middle of the day here, so I think we should be okay. I don't think
Okay.
it'll be, and it's Sunday, so Sunday's usually like the easiest day to get around in LA, so that's
So
good.
you've been there in LA for a year, and you come
No, I've been
originally,
in I've been in downtown for a year. I've been in LA for 5 going on 6 years.
and
So
before
it's
that you were in Florida.
Yeah, before that I was in Florida. So LA is like my first big move, I would say, where I actually stayed in the city. But yeah.
Okay. But when you think about where you have come from, where you grew up, how do you think that coming from Florida has impacted you?
I think Florida is a huge impact. I mean, honestly, um, I went to school for graphic design and I went to Art Institute. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. At first, I was like, I was going to be a chef. That was kind of my game plan because I enjoyed cooking. And in high school, I took like cooking classes and I liked it. And all I cared about back then was like skateboarding and surfing. I didn't really care to get an education in anything.
Mm.
So I just kind of thought like, oh yeah, I'll just cook, you know. And I went to the Art Institute because they had a pretty good program there. And my mom brought like paintings and like stuff and drawings that I did when I was like younger. And she like showed them to the guy that was like the representative to like, book you into to go into school. And he's like, have you ever thought about graphic design? And I was like, no. I was like, what's that? And I always liked photography, but everyone told me not to do photography because there's no money in it. And I was just kind of like, oh, sure, that sounds cool. I'll do graphic design. So I decided to go into graphic design, and I still liked photography. So I took photography like elective classes when I was
Mm.
there. And the biggest thing was that I took an advanced Photoshop class by the teacher. I think his name was Ciro Marchetti. And he would legit do like an entire portrait just in Photoshop. It was crazy. I think now he does like a bunch of like tarot card stuff and illustrations, which is really cool.
Mm.
But that was kind of like a catalyst for me to really understand Photoshop in general. And I was always drawn to collage. My dad used to be like an architect and stuff like that back in the day. So I was fascinated with buildings like forever.
So I
And
think
just,
what's interesting is listening to you talking already, and without really very much prompting at all, we've already kind of been introduced to your family.
yeah.
So they're a very, very big part of who you are, what you've become.
Yeah, I think that's true, like especially culturally. Like my grandma like immigrated to the States. Like she basically came to the US because her mom had like a she had to get like a really extreme brain surgery, and she somehow figured out how to get from Ecuador to New York to
Mm.
like save her mother's life. And she was pregnant with, I think, my uncle, and my dad was like, I think maybe 3.
Mm.
And she used to be a jeweler. She was a jeweler by trade.
Yeah,
So we've always had kind of like artists in the family.
yeah.
um
But
my
also,
aunt was
I
Go
did
ahead,
read
sorry.
about the jeweler in the
Oh,
family.
yeah.
And I was thinking about that, this idea, when I'm thinking about meeting artists and I'm thinking about how I title the presentations, and for you, it's constructing utopia. And of course, we're going to come to your phenomenal cityscapes in just a
Mhm.
moment. But this idea also of there being something very precious to be found in amongst lots of other things, and the idea maybe like of a jewel somehow being embedded
Yeah.
somewhere. I thought that was quite an interesting thing to have in your family history. And I mean, on the screen now, I don't want to go on to the next slide until really you've had your chance to tell us about this, because there's a lovely little segment of footage. I'm not sure if it's on your website or if it's somewhere else. Certainly on Vimeo, we can see graves where people are
Yeah.
hanged, illustrating. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the first time I went to Ecuador was in 2015, and we visited my grandfather's gravestone. And I've never met him. I've only heard stories about him. And when we went there, I was with my first cousin, my primo. You say in Spanish, you say primo hermano. So it's like, he's like the closest thing to a brother, you know? So I call him my brother just because we look a lot alike as well.
Does he feature in the film as well? I see that the
he would definitely be, yeah. So we always get mixed up, and he's an actor actually. So he's in New York now. He's going to be on Broadway again pretty soon, which is awesome. But yeah, we decided to visit our grandfather's gravestone, and it hasn't been visited in, I don't know how many years, at least over a decade. And they have artists there that basically paint the Sacred Heart of Jesus on gravestones, and they'll like put the name and all that stuff. And his was all like worn out, so we paid one of the like local artists there to like scrape off the old paint and repaint like the new like gravestone where it says like his name and all of that. And I just thought it was really interesting in general. And I was just really inspired there. Like when I went there, it was just like, it was very overwhelming, but in a good way. Like I documented so much, I didn't really know what I was documenting, but I knew I wanted to create something. So when I visited this gravestone in particular, I was just like, I just thought it was really cool that there's all these different artists there in Ecuador that are painting like the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and they're all kind of like depicting it in their own way. So what I did was just make a collage of all the different depictions of like the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and I called it Mijos, which is just like in slang is like homies basically. So I just thought it was just kind of interesting, and then I colored in like the heart, the Sacred Heart, because I thought it was like a little more impactful. But at the same time, when I do a lot of these things, it's more just on like impulse. I don't like to pretend that it's like some really thought out, you know, thing. It's just kind of like how I react essentially. So.
But even though you don't plan like a grand, you know, festival of story from what you do, nonetheless, in what you create, there is always really strong sense of direction and story, I think,
Yeah.
anyway. I mean, we're looking now on the screen, something that especially my students at school are very familiar with. And there are many of these different cityscapes that you create. Again, this is collage, isn't it? Made from your own photographs that you put together in Photoshop.
Yes. So this, when I moved to LA, I created a project called Welcome to the Neighborhood, just because I realized I couldn't do LA as one cityscape. It's just so dense. So I frequent Venice and Santa Monica a lot when I first moved to LA because I was living on the West Side. And I was like very heavy. I've always been like very athletic and into like all sorts of different training. So I like in Venice, I found like a group of people that I really connected with doing like calisthenics. So I was very familiar just kind of with the beach vibe out there, which is very different from Florida. Even I mean, coast to coast, you would think just because it's a coastline that they're very similar, but they're so different. It's really bizarre. But with Santa Monica, I tried to make everything very colorful and happy. There's just like a lot of interesting landmarks. So when I did this is like one of the earlier ones where I was trying to develop the Welcome to the Neighborhood idea. So Santa Monica, I was just like, all right, I just kind of went for it. I didn't really know what I was going to put in it, but after like visiting so many times, you kind of realize like what's the main things you want to focus on. A lot of the hotels.
Is this about you learning how to navigate a new place in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I can make that comparison to it because this is still the Santa Monica one to me is still pretty early. as I've like progressed with what I do, it's definitely way more efficient. And also there's a different level of detail, I would say.
Mm.
With a lot of these earlier composites, a lot of them are vertical because they're also a lot easier to make vertically. Because you don't have to hide a lot of the stuff as you would horizontally. It has to like, it almost has to be like a wide, everything has, there's a lot more to blend in essentially.
Mm.
But yeah, I think the Santa Monica one's pretty cool because it's kind of like a classic California, like that surf liquor sign, for example. They redid that, which is a huge bummer because that is such a cool sign. But that's actually the great thing about the project as well, is that I'm able to like document things that are at this point they don't exist anymore.
Mm.
So it's like a snapshot in time essentially, which is cool.
Yeah, kind of legacy
Yeah.
of these places. I mean, do you liken yourself to some other, let's say, photographers who've traveled or traversed cities and recorded what they've seen that has now been lost to the ravages of time? Do you have a kind of kinship or a sense of connection to any of the kind of what I think of as more pioneering photographers who would have, traveled, especially here in kind of Europe, thinking about Alger and Paris, and people who really did do service to the cities in which they lived, to kind of record that, almost like the legend and legacy of the place?
Yeah. I don't have too many, like when I got into graphic design and photography, the one thing I did focus on was I think Man Ray, which was like one of the first like the people to be able to capture an image,
Mm.
which I thought was really interesting. And he actually had some really cool work. I've always liked really weird, like abstract, like surreal stuff. I mean, obviously like Ansel Adams, which is like when I was in school, I remember studying a good amount on him. But as far as like modern day people, um, one of my biggest influences as far as photographers, I would say, is like David LaChapelle,
Mhm.
which yeah. So his stuff is just his use of color. It's always
Yeah.
something that I've just like loved, and that's just it kind of fits with what I like.
But also, I mean,
Um,
you are almost classically pop.
mhm.
There's so many pop references in what I can see you doing. I mean, in actual fact, when I speak in class about you, sometimes we've already looked at Richard Hamilton, who's collage pop artist, not working perhaps with the same color palette as you, but
Yeah,
definitely a sense that there's a new reality to be had out of existing reality, which I find really
yeah,
interesting, that someone would go to the trouble of recording individual elements of a reality that's already there, it already exists,
yeah.
and yet you are sort of reassembling. Is that because do you want to further beautify places?
Yeah, that's around what I've been focusing on now, is kind of delivering more of that message, and just realizing that it is like I said before, like a snapshot in history. So I'm able to document these things and just
Mm.
um, give it get like, I think the biggest thing is like the nostalgia, is like people see it and they're just kind of like, oh, that's amazing. And when you go there, you'll see these things, but it's captured in a way that kind of makes you miss it in a sense, So I think the use of color really explains that.
So nostalgia is always really, a kind of examination of the past and how we relate to the past. Yet this past, you're constructing things again. You've said already there are many things perhaps that appear in the composite images that are no longer even there.
Yeah,
And so they become fantastical, much as they are about real places. They are fantastical, but they're about history, they're about time passing. Is there a sadness in the work you do?
yeah, I think just generally, because you see something like this, and it the one thing I'll say about getting older is that um I did have a really good childhood. I was always treated, I mean, even though I come from like an immigrant family, I'm not I was raised as like a white kid, you know, really, to put it plainly. Like I was never treated differently. And I have a lot of really good close friends that I'm still friends with today. And there's like a huge group of us, which I think is really rare.
Mm.
But I always like to think that like my experiences and the times that I've had with my friends it was a time, and it's not a place that I can go back to. So I think that kind of relates to the artwork in a sense that like I captured that moment in time, and it's not something you can revisit again, which is sad, but at the same time, you can like reflect on and appreciate it, and kind of have that sense of like happiness, you know, but also knowing that it's gone. So
Well, I think, I spend a lot of time obviously on here talking to all different people about their art, and I speak regularly to a few kind of closer friends and associates about their art. And I always find that if kind of dig deep enough, absolutely the way that people have felt either connected to or rejected from their own past is really
yeah,
what is it's like the prime or the primary thing that manifests in their work. I mean, you sent me this beautiful photograph
yeah,
of you as a teeny tiny child,
yeah. That's me with my mom, and
and
she should dress me up like that.
it's always lovely to see that, I said to you before we started, the fact is that some of my students may watch this. I want them to see that not only are you here today talking to me, but also that you have lived a real life.
Yeah,
You've lived a real life, and that the real life is the thing that has informed everything you're doing. We've talked a little bit about, your Ecuadorian heritage, and
mhm.
there are many stories around that to do with visiting your grandfather's grave, and the story about the jeweler in your family, and lots of things you can bring forward. How do you think specifically these early years with like your mum
I think
has come forward into what you do?
it's hard to say. I mean, I had a good childhood, and I think my mom, it was always like very prominent that like I could do whatever I wanted, and in the sense of like she would believe in me if I choose whatever I choose to do. And I remember kind of doing little art competitions when I was a kid as well. Like I have one spotlight memory of like, I don't even remember exactly what it was that I did, but I like did some sort of drawing, and I won some competition, and I remember being like in a firehouse. So at a very young age, I knew that I knew that I was creative. I just didn't know what I was going to do with it.
Well, I
The
love what you
others,
said first of all about the idea that, it was your mum who went to get you in
yeah,
and brought this stuff. That's
yeah,
that is an extraordinary thing. I'm not sure people listening, you know, I think a lot of children are really embarrassed of their parents, the
yeah,
booking phases, right? But the fact is sort of imagining you at whatever you would have been, 17, 18 years old, and there's your mum with like, a suitcase full of stuff ready to just
yeah.
show everybody how amazing you are.
And I was very embarrassed at the time, just to mind you. So, but it did pay off, you know.
Well, I was going to
But
say how amazing to have such a kind and passionate cheerleader
yeah, for
for
sure.
everything that you are.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to have really good parents, and I think yeah, my mom has always been like a huge influence. Honestly, the first cityscape that I ever did was because my aunt, which is my mom's sister, she she's like, oh, she's like, she still lives in New York, and she's like kind of like in her own little neighborhood. She's kind of closed off from a lot of society. So I don't know how, I mean, she has her community,
Mm.
but she's not as like with it, with a lot of that's like going on, I think, just in the world in general. um but she like asked me, she came to visit Florida once, and she asked me to make a picture of a girl walking in the rain, like in a
Yeah,
city.
yeah, I read that.
Yeah, yeah. And she was like, oh, I want like a blue rose in the window or something like that. And I was just like, was like, okay, sure. And at the time I was just like, I was inspired by this other graphic designer. I don't know if he's still around. He went by like Emo Hawk, I think it was. But I liked a lot of his like graphic design, like collage composite stuff. But I remember thinking, I was just like, oh, I can make something. And I didn't know what I was going to make. I just kind of just went for it and ended up doing that.
Mm.
Um, and then something like so this was also coincides with that first slide with the Mijos one that I did.
Yeah.
This is just like Ecuador, just in general, because I went to a bunch of different cities. I went to Guayaquil, I went to Quito, I went to Baños, I went to like, there you have to like take the bus to get around a lot. So many bus trips and many different rides that are like, could be like a 10-hour bus ride, but that's like pretty normal out there. So for this, like in general too, it was just kind of like inspired by just all the different things that I saw there when I was there. And I always like to put weird little tokens, that seem very random, but even like the one with in the corner to the bottom right with the guy in there, and he's like holding lollipops, and he's just like selling lollipops just out in the street. It's just super random. And then the trash cans.
This just takes so long. If I put this up in class,
Yeah.
honestly, we don't get very much else done apart from just looking.
Yeah.
What's going on here? And they're so interested. It's almost like sometimes this kind of work from you is really interesting because there is a sense that you're looking for something, but you don't know what you're looking for, but you keep on looking anyway. And I observe that in a lot of the children I teach, that they're sure there must be something that's almost like a secret in there. And it's like it keeps unfolding itself. And then sometimes if we do manage to break away from it and look at something different, and then we come back to it later, inevitably they'll see something different.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the extraordinary nature of this work, is that it's so rich.
Yeah. And there are little Easter eggs that I put in there. I don't think you can see it in this slide, but in the corner, I did hide like the repainted gravestone for my grandfather.
Okay.
But I'll let you guys find that.
We'll now set about looking for that.
Yeah, it's in there.
It is also, I think, because it's from Ecuador maybe, and so therefore for us, especially here in England, they're not the landmark buildings that we may recognize. But again, this idea that we feel like we ought to recognize what certain things or buildings are. And there's always so much speculation about what each building actually represents. And you used the word already, community. When you look back at the work you've created, are there any particular images that you've produced that you feel does very effectively sum up a community?
I think, Ecuador, I think the reason for this piece being really impactful as well is that was the biggest sense out there in Ecuador, was like realizing living in the States and growing up in the States and raised here, is that the sense of community is very different. We're so distracted with so many different things and just how to live your life and make money and do all this stuff. But when you go there, there's, it's a borderline third world country. It's like Guayaquil was very, very poor. But at the same time, you see people that are like genuinely happy. I mean, obviously, they're going to be happier if they have money, but it's just kind of the simple pleasures that you can see shine through. And people were very, very proud of their country. And that was the biggest thing too. It's like going to Ecuador, everyone's like, let me show you this, let me show you about my country and take you here and take you there. Like they're very proud to show what their country has to offer, which I thought was really inspiring.
Did you feel when you were there though that you were an outsider?
Not so much. There was certain instances that were like, I would say a little sketchy. But I think luckily for me, I feel like I blend in pretty well. I mean, there was like, I mean, you kind of know when you're in a place that, you know, you don't belong, but in general, you know, kind of the thing was like, don't, there was like certain areas you couldn't take cabs from,
Mm.
and don't wear anything flashy. So it was just like, couldn't wear any like jewelry or anything like that. But we stayed pretty safe. One of the Airbnbs we stayed at, the guy was like, he's like, don't ever take a cab from here, because it was like a touristy area, and they would double park cabs and you can get kidnapped and they'll rob you. So it was pretty crazy in that sense, but overall there was no I didn't feel too bad. I mean, me and my cousin did walk, we did try to walk to the gravestone at first, which was probably a pretty bad idea because we ended up in a neighborhood that was like, okay, we don't belong here. But I mean, luckily, you know, nothing happened. But yeah, I think overall, and we had family friends out there too.
Mm.
So we met up with family friends from Ambato, and they kind of showed us around. So it was all good, not too bad.
I want to focus you in a little bit on the sense of belonging yourself and this idea. You know, I asked you initially about when you moved to LA and perhaps you wanted to try and claim something of the place or navigate the place as it was new to you. You wanted to master it somehow through capturing it completely. Um, do you feel like you belong now where you are?
I mean, I think I'm comfortable where I'm at. LA in general is very, it's like pockets of communities. So I think that was like the main reason I did this project, was because you don't ever have to leave your neighborhood, and it's not very common to be able to like go from like the east side of LA to the west side. I mean, you do it, but it's like that's your day. It's not common to just go, oh, you know, let me go to Beverly Hills really quick. That's not like that's like a kind of a day trip pretty much. But there, you kind of have to find your community in LA.
Mm.
Um, but a lot of it is very distant, and I think that's the biggest struggle when people move here is when they visit, they're like, oh my god, this place is gorgeous, it's perfect weather. But when you live here, it's a different or it's a whole different thing in general.
Do you find that do you find it's a lonely experience?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of people don't realize that until they move. They visit and they're like, it's great, but once you move, it's like most people stay to where they're at, and it's kind of up to you to kind of find your community out here,
Mm.
which is interesting.
Again, just thinking about how that then comes into your work, although we do see people, we I don't anyway, I don't ever really get any sense of real purchase on these people. Like they're silent. The buildings are the things that speak, but of course the buildings are of themselves. They are dead things. They might be beautiful and they'll be colorful, but they're not going to invite you around for dinner and be your friend.
Yeah.
So is, you know, I asked you before a little bit about sadness, and I don't always want to make it seem like I'm desperate to eke out something that's about misery and, you know, artists' angst. But I do wonder about, you know, again, this idea of trying to make somewhere more hospitable for yourself, a navigation of a place, in part because you want to fit, but also about how your work does deal with ideas or notions of being alone in these places.
Yeah, I see that, but generally, like, to me in the beginning, like, people were more of a distraction, because a lot of times when you're visiting these neighborhoods or cities, you're never really looking up, and you only see it from a distance. So it's like, if you come from, you know, if you're coming to downtown, you're like, oh my god, downtown's amazing, it looks so gorgeous, the skyline. But once you're in downtown, you don't really know where you're at. You don't know like what building you're in front of. Like, you would actually have to look up to get to be aware of the space. And especially today, it's like so many people are distracted by their phones and just, you don't really take in what's around you. And I think that's really the main thing, is because I mean, so many people, you know, you'll walk down a block and you don't know that you're right next to a historic building that's from like 1920. You have no idea. So it's like, I think it's more just like appreciating the city as a whole and seeing it as it's meant to be seen, because it's like from the ground level on a sidewalk, you don't really see it the same way. You just, you know, you see a sidewalk, you see what's in front of you, and you don't really take in what your environment is.
So that's the
Yeah.
upside maybe to aloneness then, rather than
Yeah, I think so.
yeah. And so do you actually have your own favorite building? Like, is there one particular building you've seen or been next to and observed and just thought it was so wonderful?
That's a good question, but I have no idea. I mean, in LA, I don't think there's anything that really stands out to me. The only thing I do appreciate is like kind of the way light falls on a building. So this is actually a pretty good example, because a lot of these towers, like the glass towers, if you see them in broad daylight, it doesn't look interesting at all. But when you see it at a certain time, it like, it's a whole nother thing. Um, so with Beverly Hills, is I really tried to like capture that light,
Yeah.
just because, like I said, during the day, it doesn't look the same. But as the sun sets on the west side, it illuminates everything and gives like a really nice glow.
A golden glow.
Yeah,
Hmm.
which is really cool.
And that golden glow makes it seem, even though it's maybe sometimes might feel as if it's devoid of human presence, it does make it seem very welcoming.
Yeah, and I also try to point at that the wealth, you know, because it's
Yeah.
just like, and aside from that, it's a lot of these places are very, very well off. And I think with Beverly Hills is something that I wanted to illustrate as well. But you want to be able to make it inviting, you know, just in general.
Why is it important for you to make work inviting? Is it purely commercial? You know,
Mm,
beyond the kind of seriousness of making one's own work, because one is an artist.
yeah, I
Is
think
it,
because maybe because I experienced those places too.
mm,
And I think kind of saying what you were saying before, it's like, just because I don't live here, like, why should I feel left out? You know, like I live in the city and it's all part of the city. And I just think in general, it's like everyone should be able to enjoy it, not just like a certain group of people, you know?
but there is, I mean, there is also a sense of wealth. You've said yourself, the Beverly Hills image there, you know, you wanted to convey something of that affluence. Would you say that you're particularly interested in a kind of consumeristic sense of places, things, people?
Yeah. I mean, I think so, like with this idea, this was just kind of a photo idea that I had, you know, back in the day. And I kind of like to poke fun at it. I did like another one called Designer Drugs that I thought was,
Yeah.
I literally did it as a joke. I didn't think like, oh yeah, this is going to be an amazing piece that I'm going to sell. I did it kind of just laughing at the whole culture of just what everything is. And I like to point that out a lot, but people for some reason are just like, oh my God, this is amazing. But I'm actually doing it in a mocking kind of way,
Mm.
because I mean, our culture is so consumed with just designer brands, and spending money on, to me, I think is just dumb, you know. So it's like, oh, I get it, you know, to an extent, but at the same time I kind of just see it as kind of just being silly. So with this
Is
was,
there a difference in emphasis about that kind of consumer culture between Florida and LA?
honestly, Florida is extremely flashy.
Yeah,
Especially Miami.
yeah.
And launching my career there, it was really difficult, because you get a lot of people that pretend like they're a big deal or that they have something going on, and you end up finding out that it's just all kind of fluff. So that's something that I kind of grew up and struggled with, because I grew up in Boca Raton, which is a pretty affluent area, but my family has never been at that level. But the high school that I went to was known for a lot of rich white kids, essentially. So I was raised around that, and a lot of me and my friends rejected it because we're just kind of, these kids are spoiled brats, more or less. So we kind of, that's kind of why, the culture of skateboarding, especially, I mean, surfing too, but I would say more so it's just kind of like the rebelling of just everything.
When,
So
when
yeah,
does
it was
the,
very,
when does
uh,
the rebellion, where does that rebellion start? You're describing a kind of like reaction to things in your, I guess, teenage years as a
yeah,
child growing up. Does rebellion ever stop?
I don't think so, no.
No.
I don't even know when it started. I mean, it could be maybe like a cultural thing of just family history, and just understanding like what they've gone through to be able to like be here.
Yeah.
um and when you grow up around, you know a lot of younger kids that have a lot more and didn't do anything to get it, it's almost kind of like a slap in the face a little bit, because it seems very unfair, especially as like an adolescent. um
Is that
so
also
I
to do with why there's like a maybe like an intrigue about the past and where things come from?
Yeah, I think so. I do realize that I am very like family oriented, and the only reason I wanted to be successful is to be able to like take care of my family, and I guess that's just something that's just ingrained in me. But to me, the idea of success was never like a figure, like, oh, if I make this much, or if I become a millionaire, then I'm successful.
Mm.
Like, to me, the idea of success was always, if I can just take care of my family, if I can do what I want in the sense of like come and go as I please, like if I can go travel and go somewhere and come back and have a home base, that to me is like the epitome of what success is.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I think that's kind of, it's just something that's always been with me. So, and yeah.
So we're looking at, it is a composite, but it's a mural.
Yeah, this
Telling me a little
is,
bit about it because I love it. It actually looks like this, doesn't it?
yeah, so that's the print that they, I think that was it was like a 3M contact sheet wallpaper paste that they did inside of this lobby in this hotel in Miami. And with this in particular, a contact that I had in Miami, she had a bunch of postcards from like the early 1930s of Miami. Their initial game plan was just to like frame them and put them on the wall. And she's like, I want you to just make something really cool out of all of this. So she gave me all these images, and I kind of just went to town and made a traditional collage. So all these images were scanned in, and then I just collaged it the way I wanted to,
Mm.
and just came up with this. But yeah, with this, it's like, it's interesting because there's no game plan. It's just like, this is what I have, and let's see how it goes together.
Did you, I mean, this is a very technical thing, but did you have a sense of this, the spatial relationships of like how you have put the line of bathers and then the stairs running up? Did you have a sense of that? Or is
Um,
that a happy accident?
I'm trying to remember. I don't think I did. I think I knew what the wall looked like, but as far as like how it kind of perfectly fits with that staircase, yeah, I did not plan that. I kind of just it was just a good placement for that image. But yeah, from what I remember, I don't think I also, with this project, it was a very quick turnaround time. And I was just more excited just to do it. So once I got the images, I kind of just, I think I did it probably, couldn't been more than 2 days, I don't think.
Is there a
But
particular era that you love?
yeah, definitely. I love anything from like mid-century stuff. So it's like 60s, 50s, 60s. I think I'm obsessed with that culture just because it's very classic and it's a style. It doesn't ever go away. It's not a trend. And I like
Is that also to do with, again, coming back to the idea of like your family and having very close family ties and spending time with, I don't know for sure, but you know, sort of multi-generational family, having access to those memories.
yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny too because I think I have a picture of my grandfather where he's all dressed up and it's like a black and white photo, and it's a portrait of him, and he just looks like a boss. Like it's really interesting to me because I was just like, I kind of envision of this person he was, and he's just kind of like a badass. And I never met him, and he was also very stylish, from what I saw. um
That's what I love. I mean, I'm always amazed when I look at family photographs
yeah.
and I
And
think how glamorous everybody looked.
yeah, and it's like today there's so many trends with clothing, and I don't, a lot of them just, they're repurposed, they die out, they come back, but to me I don't see it as like a substantial thing. And I just think, that period in general, and a lot of it too, I mean, even obviously the 1930s was huge, especially in downtown. For LA, the 1930s was like when LA became LA.
Mm.
So it's history.
When you are making something to begin with, obviously you've got your photographs, you've taken them yourself, so you've been around these places, you get a real sense of them, a feel for them. Um, do you always know where to begin on what I would think of as the blank canvas? You know,
No,
you said earlier that you're not, you know, you don't plan in terms of having, you don't plan a context as such,
yeah.
but do you plan a sort of technical
I
element,
mean,
compositional element?
at this point, it's a little more dialed in as far as like uh what time of day I need to take the photo and what angle.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll usually do both angles, but in the back of my mind, I typically know where the sun's going to be on a certain building.
Mm.
But when I start with a blank canvas, I literally have no idea how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
So I think that's too, like, why it's so fascinating is because um I mean, with something like this, with Winwood in particular, I did a series because every single year once Art Basel would come around, they would repaint all of these walls.
Mm.
So every year it changed, which kind of gave me the opportunity to make a cityscape every year. So with this, it's just, I take the pictures of the murals that I like, and I obviously have way more than this, but the best way is like it's a puzzle for me.
Yeah.
So
Well, I've
I
written that
use,
down in my notes. I've written pieces of a puzzle. I think I've written that on every
yeah.
page of my notes about your work.
Yeah.
And yet
I'm
there's nothing fragmentary about what you do. That's the other thing I find interesting. So although it is, you know, I could imagine you assembling something as if it's a jigsaw, at the same time, there doesn't ever there's no gap. So there's no
yeah,
it's a fragment.
and that's how I like to keep it. I, it just, in my mind, it just works. I really have no way to be able to explain it.
Mm.
It's just, once I start putting things together, it's like, okay, this fits here, this fits here. I don't try to think about it too much, because if I do, I'll never get to the end. It's just, you can be second guessing yourself all day and say, oh, maybe this goes here, this goes there. I generally try to do like a rough layout.
Mm.
And once it's pretty decent, then I'm able to like get to the next step. um
See, I find this also very interesting because I was reading somewhere somebody described what you did as creating chaos. And to me, this is really the antithesis of chaos. This is finding order and form, and in fact, enhancing all form through what you do.
yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I feel like in our minds there's so much going on. Everyone has like so many different things to think about and worry
Mm.
about, and cities in general are very chaotic. So I try to highlight the good parts of it, and showing how overwhelming it can be,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like how beautiful it is as well.
But also, you know, the fact that there's such a sense of, although it's very busy visually, there's also usually a serenity to your work. Perhaps that's because it doesn't have the frenetic sense of many bodies piled into the frame, or,
Yeah.
you know, everything is
Yeah.
so curated, very cleverly curated.
Yeah. And I think that's too, is like the reason I don't include a lot of people is because it kind of takes away from like the beauty of it, I think, in a sense. And I want to be able, and this, to be honestly, which is pretty great because it's the complete opposite of what we're talking about.
I know.
Oh, and funny enough, I actually do have it printed. I don't know if you can see it behind
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So it's a big like 60 by 30 print. Um,
I mean, I put this one, this is our last slide together to talk about. And I mean, I've just talked to you. I haven't actually referred to my notes really once until just there. And I want to make sure that I do justice to all these beautiful things we're looking at that you've produced. But I think, you know, as a parting shot for Andrew Soria's work, this was quite it was a very difficult choice, about what to finish with. And I wondered about the sense of journeying. You know, you very generously shared your story, not just with me, but also in other sort of forums and channels. People have interviewed you about going to Ecuador, for example, ideas of journeys, places are maps and journeys. And you, again, I come back to this word navigate. In fact, I've written that down, as well as puzzle, many times. We're
mhm.
navigating places through what you show us. What do you hope we as your audience do or feel when we look at your work?
um, I kind of try to leave it up to how people want to respond to it, but generally, um, I think life is just it's it is a controlled chaos. You know, it's a big mess, and you're trying to take charge of it, take control of it, and put it all together in a way that makes sense. Um, and I think that's a really good way of just that's kind of why I kind of gear to nostalgia, is because nothing's ever perfect. You know, everyone likes to think of this idea of just, you know, having nice clothes and a fancy car, that your life is amazing. But and especially growing up where I did, you realize that that's not the case. It's like a lot of these people who are so wealthy are miserable. And then in the other sense, it's like I, you know, going to a country where people have so little and they're so happy. So I think in general, it's just finding that balance and having this controlled chaos, because it is chaotic, you know?
Is there also a, you know, a balance between other big kind of elemental forces? Like, is there an interplay between, or a balance between, um, good and bad?
Yeah. And I mean, something like this, you know, heavily weighs on the bad, but
Mm.
I do like to do, you know, the typical cityscape style, where it's like kind of highlighting the beautiful things of the city. And I also like to do things that kind of pick out on certain issues and certain problems.
Mm.
This is a really good example because, I mean, this is LA traffic in a nutshell. I mean, and to add just all the smog and everything that's like polluting the air.
Mm.
And I do actually have another piece that isn't done yet called Smog City, because only in LA do you see smog check stations all over.
Mm.
And it's like coming from somewhere in Florida, like from Florida, I've never seen a smog check ever. But in LA, it's a dime a dozen, they're everywhere.
Mm.
So I I do try to focus on issues. Like there's one I did called Under Construction that is actually kind of points at global warming, because when I was living in Miami, they were building so many new construction projects, and Miami is built on limestone, which is extremely porous, and it will go underwater. so it's only a matter of time. And it was really frustrating because I was living in a building where they started 2 construction projects on both sides of the building. So it was daily construction noise, I think starting at, I don't remember if it was like 7 a.m. or what it was. But it just seems really unfair to the people that are like living there, and they're not doing anything to address the problem. Like when it would rain, the streets would flood, and particularly in Sunset Harbor. And they actually raised up the street, I think like a couple feet to deal with the issue, but obviously that's not going to solve it. It's just a band-aid. So I do like to point at those things, and I do want to see if people figure it out as well. I don't try to make it so obvious.
Yeah.
I guess this one might be a little more obvious because I think many people are, LA's traffic is famous at this point.
Well, I
So
think the thing I liked about it though also is there's a sense that you're coming and going.
yeah, and
And
it's like,
I wonder about that for you now, having spoken to you about all of this, that, you've been downtown in LA now for a year, you're telling us, and you feel quite happy now. You know, I don't mean maybe put roots down. Nonetheless, you feel maybe more connected or perhaps welcomed there.
yeah,
So are you still coming to LA, or are you already thinking about leaving LA?
definitely thinking about leaving. I've been in LA for a really, for not a really long time, but it's, the longest I've been away from my family.
Yeah.
And my sister has, I have a niece now, and I have 2 nephews. So at my point in my career and in my life, I do realize I need to, in some way, shape, or form, be able to just be close enough, or be able to just go whenever I please and not have to worry about, money, just to be able to see my family. So that to me is extremely important. And I've always seen LA as a transient city.
Yeah.
It does have a lot to offer, especially for me creating artwork, because it's just an endless amount of interesting things. And LA is like, I can say it's a home base. I'm very comfortable with LA. I'm comfortable with the area and a lot of the people here, which is good. So I'm not afraid to leave LA, but knowing that I like to travel and a lot of this stuff that I'm navigating through different cities, that is something I want to continue to do.
Mm.
So ideally, the one thing I've thought about doing is kind of doing van life for a bit and being able to travel through the US and go to different cities, and just generally be able to travel to different parts of the world and do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that would be something very pertinent thing now in terms of the hopes and dreams of so many people, is
Yeah.
the sense that we might find again some freedom to travel.
Yeah.
I mean, outside the US, is there a particular city that you would love to give your special Andrew Soria stamp to?
Um, I've always thought Spain, um, because I'm kind of interested in the roots of my last name. My mom is actually Puerto Rican, and I think she's part Spanish as well. I don't really know her history as well, because she like lost her parents at a very young age, and she was raised by her grandmother. Um, I haven't been to Puerto Rico yet, which I would like to go, but I do want to do maybe one of those like DNA test things and kind of see. But I know I'm mainly Ecuadorian. But I always thought Spain too, because there's a famous person from Spain that has my last name, Soria. But I know we're not related, but I just found it interesting because this guy was like, there's like a statue of him. I haven't done enough research on it. I know my cousin was telling me about it. Um, but I've always thought Europe was interesting because I thought Spain would be a good starting point,
Mm.
and being able to like travel east across Europe, and kind of go to different, because there it's like you can hit so many different countries so quickly.
Yep.
And I find that like a really cool thing. So hopefully one day I'll be able to work it out where I can kind of just maybe start there and casually and make my way across. Also too, I think maybe like maybe Japan or maybe the Philippines or something like that, or Thailand. But that's all a lot of planning. But that to me would be more of like kind of relaxing. As far as like artwork, I feel like Spain would be an interesting city because it's very historic as well. I know a lot of Europe in general is. Um, so I think that would be a great thing to experience. Yeah.
Mm. Wow, I'm sure that we all, whether just viewers of the channel or any of my students watching this, will wait, watch, and see, and hope for something again from you, some fantastic cityscape that helps us feel as if we access something in wonder, really, about all these different places you share with us. Andrew, thank you very much for spending the time with me this evening.
So thanks, Sandy.
I
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's awesome. Been awesome.